Seward Johnson was larger than life. He had a giant, kind, generous heart, and his joie de vivre was contagious. His laughter filled every room he entered, and his enthusiasm and exuberance made him one of a kind. Seward was a father, husband, artist, visionary, humanitarian, mischief maker, philanthropist, and his impact was far-reaching and truly touched so many. Born in New Brunswick, New Jersey on April 16, 1930, to Ruth Dill and John Seward Johnson I. By the age of 6, he had lived in London, Paris, Bermuda, and New Mexico. As a teenager, he spent a summer on a ranch in Canada, a transformative experience that solidified his love of nature, horseback riding, and exploration. In 1950, while attending the University of Maine, Seward interrupted his studies to enlist in the U.S. Navy. After serving his country, a confident, older, and stronger Seward began to truly embrace life. He set out with 2 Navy buddies on a 2,200-mile canoe expedition to the upper edge of the Northwest Territories of the Arctic Ocean. These formative years framed what was to come for Seward Johnson, a life passionately dedicated to beauty, art, nature, music, humanity, and doing the impossible. But it was the serendipitous encounter at an airport with Cecilia Joyce Horton, a novelist doing graduate work at Johns Hopkins, that would change his flight pattern forever.
We both were put off the same airplane. It was overbooked, going to Nantucket. There was another fellow who was put off too, and I talked him into going into seeing the big city. And so she had to eat dinner with me. By the end of that dinner, I knew that we had to be one. And she did too. It was wonderful, and I knew it then that all the complexities of my life would fall into place.
Cecilia took to the task of civilizing Seward, and soon the pair were married and ensconced in the literary and artistic world of Cambridge, Massachusetts. Books, painting, conversation, and dance all marked this period of newlywed bliss. With the birth of his son, John, a sense of urgency fell upon Seward to find a career that would allow him to feel fulfillment both professionally and creatively.
When I was fired from Johnson & Johnson and didn't know what the hell to do, I started painting. I started to build out the shapes. The third dimension gave it more punch. And I think that's when my wife suggested to me, why don't you try sculpting? And I went and took a sculpture course. And they were fooling around with styrofoam and talking about space and mass, and I quit the class immediately because styrofoam told me I had a means of creating a shape. I did my first piece, and my idea was I was going to send it to a foundry and have it cast in stainless steel. The head of the foundry called up and said, "This piece is really beautiful. Do you mind if I enter it in the competition?" And I said, "Go ahead, be my guest." It was the Design and Steel Award. It was a big to-do. And they had bridges and skyscrapers and art and everything. So they did the art thing first, and my piece won the art. They went through all the others, and then they had the grand prize. It won the grand prize.
That same year, Cecilia and Seward celebrated the birth of their daughter, India, who completed their family, and further inspired Seward to pursue what would become his life's work. He returned home to New Jersey to begin the next chapter. Seward quickly grew frustrated with the traditional foundry model that alienated artists from their work. As a result, he created the Johnson Atelier Technical Institute of Sculpture and surrounded himself with a band of merry pranksters and creative innovators who made the technical processes of making sculpture accessible to a generation of artists.
Atelier I started around 74. It was always a fairly crazy place. When you get 100 artists together, it's a very interesting atmosphere. Everybody was sort of learning from everybody else.
The Atelier became a culture unto itself, fusing creativity with a sense of anarchy that was the source of dozens of colorful stories over the years. Today, the Seward Johnson Atelier continues to invite and welcome artists as active participants in realizing their creative vision.
Started out with the simple acts of being human in life. This is what I was celebrating at the beginning. I was celebrating the familiar. I wanted to populate parks that people were afraid to go in, so I would put a presence in a park, a human presence that would be like a decoy and bring people back in and make the park safe again. Then when I built grounds for sculpture, I decided that I had to have things in the park that celebrated being in nature. And I thought, well, who did this before me? And it was the Impressionists. The whole spirit of the Impressionist movement was what I was trying to do, bringing people back into nature. It was such a wonderful, crazy thing of taking a two-dimensional painting and making it three-dimensional and being able to walk into it.
As a sculptor, Seward Johnson's name and reputation began to climb in the 1980s, often referred to as America's most popular sculptor by the media. Over the course of 5 decades, there were more than 450 designs and thousands of permanent and temporary emplacements of Seward's works. His sculptures were subsequently exhibited in the United States, Canada, Europe, Russia, Australia, and Asia, and are included in numerous museums, as well as private and public art collections. Seward's first solo museum show introduced his Beyond the Frame series, and encompassed the entire building of the famed Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Selections from this series have since traveled throughout Italy, Germany, and are now sited in France along the official culture trail of Europe. In his Icons Revisited series, Seward explored lasting iconic images that spanned generations, highlighting moments of emotional intensity such as the Times Square kiss. Each sculpture asks provocative questions concerning our embrace of particular visual icons. Seward began enlarging his sculptures into what would become his monumental scale works, which span up to 60 feet. The interaction, photo-taking, and placemaking of these works all over the world have had dramatic impact on the cities where they've been sited. During his exhibition openings, Seward was always surrounded by well-wishers. Fans felt they knew him through his humor and the irresistible accessibility of his art, and he never disappointed, as he was warm and charming and irreverent at each gathering. He was authentic with everyone, and they could feel it. One very Seward moment occurred during the opening of his exhibition of sculptures in Manhattan. From the podium, lifting a glass of champagne to toast his wife and noting the street they were standing on, he said he'd always wanted to say he'd sung on Broadway, and proceeded to serenade Cecilia.
And now I can say I sang on Broadway.
Seward Johnson was inducted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame in 2014 and received the International Sculpture Center's Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. Over the past 5 decades, Seward continued to add sculptures to all of his different series and to invent intriguing new chapters of his artworks. In recent years, Seward returned to painting and repurposed antique trays as his canvases. Capturing the scenes from his most loved locations, his painted trays are brilliant, emotionally rich, and tell stories of time and space, of his love and pride for his son John and daughter India and their children, of his never-ending romance with his beloved wife Cecilia Joyce. Yes, one of a kind. Seward lived life his way. We got to bask in his illumination. He was appointed president of the Naughty Club by his grandchildren. They understood his sly sense of seriously not serious. Those who encountered him along the way felt lucky and walked away smiling. His creations, Grounds for Sculpture, the Johnson Atelier, A Magnificent Family, and all of his artworks, big and small, will continue to bring that visceral spark of joy to our landscapes and to our psyches.
This is what life is about.
Seward, you will be forever in our hearts.